Your breakfast isn't neutral territory. It's either feeding your vitality or accelerating your decline. Most men over 60 believe they can eat what they've always eaten. Dead wrong. Your aging body is sending signals you're ignoring, and the consequences are stacking up daily. These 5 breakfast foods are sabotaging your cognitive function, energy, and independence. The nutrition industry won't tell you this truth, but your body already knows it. It's time you listened. The responsibility to change is yours alone. Number 1. Sugary cereals. Your breakfast table is a battleground, and that colorful cereal box is your enemy. I've seen countless men in their 60s and 70s, accomplished in their careers, defeated by what's on their spoon each morning. One gentleman I worked with, brilliant mind, built a business from nothing, was experiencing mental fog so thick he couldn't finish a crossword puzzle. His morning ritual? A generous bowl of that heart-healthy cereal is advertised everywhere. What you need to understand is that your body at 60 plus is not metabolically equipped to handle the sugar assault that comes from these processed breakfast cereals. It's not just about calories, it's about the fundamental biochemistry of aging. Jung talked about the shadow, those aspects of ourselves we refuse to acknowledge. Your shadow is that biological reality you're ignoring. Your insulin response is dramatically different now. The blood sugar spike from sugary cereals creates a cascade effect. First comes the false energy, then the crash, then the craving. It's a perfect loop of dependency. Your brain, which requires steady glucose, experiences these fluctuations as micro-traumas. Over time, this contributes to what many simply accept as senior moments, but there's nothing inevitable about cognitive decline at your age. When you reach for that cereal box, you're not just making a food choice, you're choosing a particular relationship with your own vitality. These cereals, especially those marketed as healthy, contain more sugar than ice cream in many cases. The manufacturers hide behind fiber claims while loading you with glucose that your aging pancreas struggles to process. The worst part is how these foods hijack your morning potential. The hours before noon are your cognitive gold. These are the hours when your cortisol is naturally elevated, where your mind can achieve clarity if properly fueled. Instead, most men surrender this precious time to a sugar-induced fog. The symbolism is perfect, surrendering your power first thing in the morning and calling it breakfast. What you need instead is protein and healthy fat to start your day. Eggs, avocados, nuts. These provide sustained energy without the crash. The shift isn't easy. Sugar has powerful hooks, but ask yourself this: what price are you paying for convenience? What aspects of your mental sharpness, your emotional stability, your physical energy are you sacrificing for that sweet, familiar taste? You have decades of life experience. You've overcome challenges that would crush younger men. And yet here you are, being manipulated by colorful boxes and clever marketing that target your deepest vulnerabilities, the fear of irrelevance, the desire for simplicity, the comfort of routine. Breaking free from sugary cereals isn't just about nutrition, it's about reclaiming your sovereignty as a man who refuses to be diminished. The truth is stark. Your breakfast cereal is stealing your clarity, your energy, and ultimately your independence. This isn't about living forever, it's about living completely, with all your faculties intact, for as long as you're here, and that starts with what you put in your body at the beginning of each day. Number 2, processed meats. I was sitting across from a retired police officer, watching him struggle to button his shirt cuffs. His fingers, once steady enough to handle a service weapon, now swollen and stiff. He'd faithfully eaten the same breakfast for decades: bacon, sausage, or ham with his eggs. It's protein, he'd insist, not realizing the silent battle raging in his joints. Most men over 60 don't connect what's on their breakfast plate with the pain in their hands, the fog in their brain, or the pressure in their chest. Processed meats, bacon, sausage, ham, salami, these aren't just protein sources, they're inflammatory agents. The preservation process creates compounds that your younger body could neutralize. Your older body cannot. There's a concept in psychology called willful blindness, our capacity to ignore what threatens our comfort or identity. Many men have built their identity around certain breakfast rituals. The sizzle of bacon represents normalcy, comfort, even masculinity. Questioning these habits feels like questioning your very self, but ignoring the consequences doesn't make them disappear. The nitrates and nitrites in processed meats don't just affect your cardiovascular system, they create compounds that cross the blood-brain barrier. Your brain, the organ that houses your memories, your wisdom, everything you've built over 6 decades, is particularly vulnerable after 60. The inflammation triggered by these breakfast meats contributes to cognitive decline that most attribute simply to getting older. Look at the symmetry here. Processed foods are shortcuts. They sacrifice long-term well-being for immediate gratification. Isn't that the opposite of the wisdom you've accumulated over your lifetime? You've learned that meaningful things require patience, care, attention to detail. Yet each morning many men abandon these principles at the breakfast table. The salt content alone in these meats is problematic for your aging kidneys and blood pressure regulation systems. Your body's ability to process sodium diminishes with age. What you could handle at 40 becomes a significant burden at 65. Each slice of bacon contains nearly a quarter of your daily sodium limit before you've even started your day. The alternatives aren't about deprivation, they're about substitution and upgrade. Fresh fish like salmon, plant proteins, or if you must have meat, fresh, unprocessed options prepared simply. These provide the protein your muscles need without the inflammatory cascade that processed meats trigger. This isn't about living like a monk, it's about making informed choices. When you eliminate processed meats from your breakfast, something remarkable happens within days. The chronic background inflammation begins to subside. Men report clearer thinking, less joint pain, more stable energy. These aren't miraculous cures. They're simply your body's natural state when it's not fighting against what you're feeding it. The reluctance to change breakfast habits runs deeper than taste preferences. It touches on existential questions. If I change how I eat, who am I becoming? What else must I acknowledge about my aging? But consider this: refusing to adapt doesn't stop the changes happening in your body. It just means you face them with fewer resources, with compromised strength. Your breakfast plate is where your daily choices begin. It sets a precedent for how you'll treat yourself all day. Will you choose comfort over vitality, habit over health, or will you demonstrate the same wisdom in feeding yourself that you've applied to other areas of your life? Number 3, white bread and refined carbohydrates. I watched my father spread butter across his white toast every morning for 40 years. A man who meticulously maintained his car, his home, his finances, yet unknowingly sabotaged his health with what he considered the most innocent of breakfast staples. By 70, his energy would crash by mid-morning, a pattern he attributed to just getting older rather than the blood sugar roller coaster he rode daily. The white bread on your breakfast table represents one of the greatest nutritional deceptions of our time. We've been conditioned to see it as neutral, harmless, a simple vehicle for other foods. But for the man over 60, white bread and other refined carbohydrates are anything but neutral. They're active agents working against your cognitive stability and energy management systems. Consider what happens physiologically. The refined flour in white bread, bagels, and most breakfast pastries converts to glucose in your bloodstream almost immediately. Your aging pancreas, which has been producing insulin for over 6 decades, must suddenly produce a surge of this hormone to manage the glucose. This creates a metabolic stress that younger bodies handle with resilience. Your body cannot. This stress manifests as what psychologists call cognitive blunting, a measurable decline in mental processing, focus, and memory retrieval. The tragedy is that most men attribute this to age rather than what they just ate. There's a certain fatalism to it, as if mental decline were an inevitable tax on longevity rather than often the result of specific changeable habits. The architectural structure of refined carbohydrates mirrors their effect on your life, stripped of substance, designed for immediate gratification rather than sustained nourishment. These foods have been processed to remove the very elements, fiber, nutrients, complexity that would slow their absorption and make them useful fuel. What remains is essentially pure glucose. After 60, your glucose regulation becomes less efficient. The energy spikes and crashes become more pronounced. This volatility affects not just your energy but your mood stability. The irritability many older men experience mid-morning is often dismissed as personality or stress when it's frequently this blood sugar crash. You become a less effective version of yourself without understanding why. What's particularly insidious about white bread and refined carbohydrates is their ubiquity and socially acceptable status. Nobody raises an eyebrow at the man having toast with breakfast. But that choice, multiplied across thousands of mornings, has cumulative effects on cognitive function, energy management, and ultimately independence. The alternatives require minimal sacrifice but deliver profound benefits. whole grain breads with intact fiber matrix, protein-focused breakfasts that minimize carbohydrate impact, even simply eliminating bread altogether in favor of vegetables and healthy fats. Men who make this single change often report remarkable clarity of thought within days. There's a deeper symbolism at work in the white bread problem. It represents our culture's preference for what appears clean, simple, and convenient over what is complex, challenging, and ultimately nourishing. The parallel to how we approach aging itself is unmistakable. We prefer simple narratives about senior moments over the complex truth that many aspects of cognitive decline are within our control. Every time you reach for white bread at breakfast, you're making a philosophical choice, not just a dietary one. You're choosing the path of least resistance, the comfortable, familiar. But at 60 plus, the path of least resistance leads downward. The path upward toward maintained vitality and independence requires resistance, challenge, and the wisdom to discriminate between what's easy and what's worthy. Number 4, conventional dairy products. I remember sitting across from a retired college professor who couldn't understand why, despite his intellectual capabilities, he couldn't shake the persistent brain fog that descended mid-morning. His breakfast ritual was what many would consider healthy, a large glass of milk and yogurt with fruit. He was proud of his calcium intake, unaware that what sustained him in his 40s was now undermining him in his 70s. Conventional dairy products represent one of the most misunderstood categories in the aging man's diet. The milk, yogurt, and cheese you consumed without issue for decades can become problematic after 60. Your digestive system undergoes significant changes as you age, including a reduction in lactase, the enzyme that breaks down lactose. What once nourished now often inflames. This isn't just about lactose intolerance, which manifests obviously. It's about subtle, chronic inflammatory responses that many men never connect to their dairy consumption. The case in protein in conventional dairy becomes increasingly difficult for your aging digestive system to process properly. The undigested proteins trigger immune responses that manifest as joint pain, congestion, and cognitive effects many mistake for normal aging. The psychological attachment to dairy runs deep. Milk represents comfort, normalcy, even maternal nourishment at an unconscious level. Giving it up feels like surrendering something fundamental. Jung would recognize this as confronting an archetype, the nourishing mother. But what once nourished can later harm if we don't recognize the changing relationship between our aging bodies and certain foods. Conventional dairy products, particularly those from industrially raised cows, contain hormones and antibiotics that affect your already changing hormonal balance. After 60, your endocrine system becomes more vulnerable to these disruptions. The conventional wisdom that dairy supports bone health ignores evidence that many inflammatory aspects of dairy can actually contribute to calcium mobilization from bones, the opposite of the intended effect. The inflammation triggered by problematic dairy consumption doesn't stay localized. It becomes systemic, affecting your cardiovascular system, your joints, and critically your brain. The blood-brain barrier becomes more permeable with age, allowing inflammatory compounds greater access to neural tissue. The mental fatigue many men experience by mid-morning has direct connections to what they consumed at breakfast. Most men have never tested the effects of eliminating dairy from their morning routine. They've accepted foggy thinking, joint stiffness, and mid-morning energy crashes as inevitable companions to aging. But those who experiment with dairy elimination often report remarkable improvements within weeks, sometimes even days. Clearer thinking, reduced pain, more stable energy levels throughout the morning. The alternatives don't require sacrifice. Plant-based milks fortified with calcium and vitamin D, fermented foods that support gut health without the inflammatory potential, high-quality grass-fed dairy in smaller amounts for those who tolerate it well. The goal isn't elimination for its own sake, but identifying whether this common breakfast component is serving or undermining your vitality. There's profound irony in how conventional nutritional wisdom has emphasized calcium intake through dairy while ignoring how the inflammatory aspects of dairy might affect overall health. It's symbolic of our fragmented approach to aging, addressing isolated nutritional needs while ignoring systemic effects. The wiser approach integrates knowledge of how your aging body processes foods differently. Your breakfast choices represent your first assertion of control each day. When you pour milk over cereal or add cream to coffee without questioning its effects, you relinquish that control. You accept the narrative that declining function is inevitable rather than often the result of specific choices that could be modified. The true power of aging with vitality lies not in denying the changes in your body, but in responding to them with informed adaptation. Number 5, fruit juices and sweetened beverages. I sat with a retired engineer who meticulously tracked his health metrics, yet couldn't understand why his blood pressure remained elevated despite medication. Each morning he drank a large glass of orange juice for the vitamin C, unaware that this seemingly healthy habit was sabotaging his cardiovascular health. His doctor had never mentioned it, focusing instead on pharmaceutical solutions to a problem partially created at breakfast. Fruit juices and sweetened beverages represent perhaps the most deceptive category of breakfast foods for men over 60. They carry the halo of health, images of fresh fruit, promises of vitamins, the cultural endorsement of being natural. But the biochemical reality tells a different story. When you consume juice, you're essentially ingesting fruit with the fiber removed, leaving primarily sugar and some vitamins. For the aging metabolic system, fruit juice hits the bloodstream with alarming speed. A glass of orange juice contains the sugar of several oranges without the fiber that would normally slow absorption. Your pancreas, which has been producing insulin for over 6 decades, must suddenly surge production to manage this glucose load. This creates metabolic stress that younger bodies handle easily. Yours cannot. The psychological comfort of juice runs deep in our cultural consciousness. It represents virtue, health consciousness, even a form of self-care. Giving it up feels counterintuitive. This illustrates what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding contradictory beliefs. You believe juice is healthy, yet it's triggering inflammatory responses your body is increasingly unable to manage. What's particularly insidious about these beverages is their liquid form. Your body doesn't register liquid calories the same way it registers solid food. You don't compensate by eating less later. So these morning beverages add a significant glucose load without triggering satiety mechanisms. For men managing weight in their 60s and beyond, this represents a substantial hidden obstacle. The effect extends beyond weight. The rapid glucose spike from juice affects cognitive function through what researchers call neuroinflammation. Simply put, your brain doesn't function optimally in an environment of fluctuating blood sugar. The mental clarity many men seek through coffee is simultaneously undermined by the juice they consume alongside it, a perfect example of working against yourself without realizing it. Coffee itself becomes problematic when sweetened or doctored with flavored creamers. These additions transform a potentially beneficial morning beverage into a glucose delivery system. Many men who pride themselves on drinking black coffee throughout their working years gradually transition to sweetened versions as they age, seeking comfort rather than function, often unconsciously. The alternatives require minimal sacrifice. Water infused with fresh fruit for flavor, whole fruits instead of their juices, unsweetened tea with its cognitive benefits. Even simply diluting juices to reduce their sugar concentration can be a transitional step. Men who eliminate sweetened beverages at breakfast often report substantial improvements in energy stability throughout the morning. There's a certain wisdom in recognizing that what served you in earlier decades may not serve you now. This isn't surrender. It's strategic adaptation. The truly strong man isn't the one who rigidly maintains habits regardless of their effects, but the one who can assess honestly and adjust accordingly. Your changing relationship with fruit juice mirrors the broader challenge of aging with intention rather than by default. Each morning as you decide what to drink with breakfast, you're making a philosophical choice about your relationship with pleasure, health, and immediate versus delayed gratification. The juice that gives immediate sensory pleasure and a brief energy surge comes with a cost that compounds over time. The wiser choice, the harder choice, provides less immediate reward but supports the sustained vitality that makes meaningful living possible in your 7th and 8th decades. Your breakfast isn't just a meal, it's a daily declaration of how seriously you take your remaining years. These 5 foods, these seemingly innocent morning choices, are silent architects of your decline, or with their absence, the foundation of your continued vitality. The chaos of aging comes not from the passage of years, but from the accumulation of small surrenders, the convenient bowl of cereal, the comforting slice of toast, the familiar strip of bacon. Order emerges not from fighting time itself, but from aligning your choices with biological reality. The archetypal hero doesn't slay the dragon once. He does it every morning, with the first decision of the day. Ask yourself, will you continue to trade your clarity, your energy, and ultimately your independence for the fleeting comfort of familiar foods? Or will you choose the harder path that leads upward? No one else can make this choice for you, and no one else will bear its consequences.